Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. I used to be a rockette. Then I became a journalist. Stacy?
Is that what you call it?
I have great legs.
As a journalist, we have some interesting stories here to cover, and these are financial chaos happening in the world. And you know, you always say that you can't taper a Ponzi, and the Federal Reserve has tried to taper a Ponzi. They're unwinding their quantitative easing, and interest rates are rising. So far, people have said, well, we haven't seen any sort of reaction. Nothing's happening so far that's bad in the U.S. Stock markets continue to be at, near all-time highs, and the property markets are booming. They're rising at like 5, 6, 7% a year. So where's the chaos that was going to follow tapering the Ponzi? And of course, as we keep on pointing out, we're in a globalized financial system operating on the U.S. dollar standard. And when we raise interest rates here, that means the dollar increases in value. And lo and behold, we've had some emerging market currency chaos. So I want to look at what's been happening in Argentina. Argentine central bank reserves down $1 billion today at $53.41 billion, according to Bloomberg. They've been trying to manage the collapse of the currency, which is remarkably happening out of the blue. I think it's as investors have realized that the Fed is trying to taper the Ponzi. They thought, they're not going to taper the Ponzi. And they have. And now investors are fleeing the Argentine currency, Mexico, Turkey, Brazil, Russia. They're leaving emerging market currencies suddenly and fleeing into the dollar.
The act of raising interest rates after you've lowered them for so long through quantitative easing, doing the opposite, or quantitative tightening. Imagine swallowing a porcupine and then trying to pull it back up. So all those quills, they're facing one way on the way down. But you pull that back out, you regurgitate that porcupine, and those quills get stuck in your esophagus. And they cause tremendous, you suffocate and die. Not even David Blaine could regurgitate a porcupine. He just regurgitates little frogs.
You've probably just challenged him to try it.
David Blaine, I challenge you to swallow and regurgitate a porcupine. I'll bet you 1,000 Bitcoin that you cannot do this.
Well,
a full-grown porcupine.
Well, of course, Bitcoin is doing quite well in Argentina, but I'll show you the chart. It's a remarkable chart. Again, BBC Newsnight thinks currency collapses in certain countries are funny, but I don't think this is funny. There's an inflation rate of over 25% in Argentina, and it's obviously a crisis for the population. The elite are always well protected against this. The bottom 99.5% are not protected from this, and the currency is collapsing. Argentine peso in free fall. A central bank changes strategy. Central bank said to accept currency at low of 25 per dollar fair value, according to the IMF. IMF says board to meet on Friday to discuss Argentina. And there's the chart just from this year of the Argentine peso.
Right. So just to review, because you're bringing up something incredibly important here, the Ponzi, the taper of the scheme, that is the pyramid, that is the dollar, is being quantitatively tightened, causing dollar interest rates to go up, and this is having a reaction in Argentina most spectacularly, but also in the entire emerging market economy. They are now suffering catastrophe. And so, A, either the central banks get together and drop interest rates once again.
Sure, yeah.
And B, as you've noted, Argentina is a place of adoption for Bitcoin, as are all these countries that are suffering from this. Venezuela, the U.S. dollar hegemony. So not only is China, Iran, and Germany exiting the U.S. dollar by creating a competitor to SWIFT. But then you have Argentina, Venezuela, and some of these other countries, probably Turkey soon, running to Bitcoin. So you've got, and then Russia's running to gold. So you've got Bitcoin and gold are becoming the go-to assets while the U.S. dollar hits the buffers and simply cannot support this Ponzi scheme any longer.
On the individual level, it makes sense to perhaps hold some Bitcoin because there are geopolitical insanity. It's only going to get worse because it always happens throughout history. Whenever any empire collapses, look at, Europe from pre-World War I through World War II. That was essentially the part of it was due to the British Empire collapsing and the chaos that ensued from that. When the the Austrian Empire collapse, the same thing, like chaos across Europe. So I think at this sort of point in time, when these currencies are falling like this, you have to have some sort of protection, whether it's gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Mexico's currency is falling. Russia's currency continues to fall, but at least they're earning huge amounts of dollars. In Argentina, by the way, I want to point out that they're blowing through remarkable amounts of U.S. dollars, their foreign exchange reserves, in order to keep the peso from falling too far. And that only exists, those U.S. reserves exist there because of Christina de Kirchner, who was the predecessor to McAfee. She was very, nationalistic in terms of not wanting to be part of the IMF globalized system for fear of what happened previously with the debt chaos and the collapse and the economic chaos that happened in Argentina. So she built up these massive reserves there. So he's blowing them on trying to prop up a currency, which is, again, throughout history, most fiat currencies anyway go to zero. So he's trying to stop the inevitable. He should just keep that hard cash, of the dollars, and let the currency fall.
As a follow-up there, Bitcoin, one of the greatest attributes is that it's censorship resistant. Mm-hmm. We travel all over the world, and we travel here in the United States, and people come up to us all the time and say, thank you for telling me to buy Bitcoin at $3. I'm now a multi-Bitcoin millionaire. But not as many Americans, because, of course, RT has been censored in America and the UK. And so the millions of people who could have been Bitcoin millionaires right now are going to be watching on the sidelines as Bitcoin goes to $100,000.
So here's another headline about what's happening in Argentina. As U.S. dollar and interest rates rise, all heck breaks loose in emerging market currencies. When the hot money gets antsy, a currency crisis morphs into a debt crisis. So that's important. Currency crises often morph into debt crises if you have debts denominated in foreign currencies. So Argentina has a lot of debts in U.S. dollars. It's hard for them to earn U.S. dollars, like, say, Russia can, or Brazil, because they have a lot of natural resources that are priced in dollars, and when the ruble falls, it's actually the oil that they sell is rising in ruble prices, so they're earning more income. Mexico, they're kind of out of oil at this point. They've Cantarell is blown, so that their income in dollars is not as high. So the point that he's making here, however, is that it was only in January that Argentina managed to sell billions in 100-year bonds. So investors were knocking down the gates to get in on this 100-year bond offering.
Wall Street is like goldfish. They'll eat until they die, right? So you show them something to trade, and they'll trade it. But, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts has made a point often quite germane to this discussion, in that Trump's trade wars don't make any sense, because the only way to keep these countries dependent on the dollar is that they have to export to the U.S. in exchange for dollars, because they need dollars to be part of the global economy. And so when you go into a trade war and you cut that off, you put a gun to your head and commit financial suicide by killing the dollar, which is what the Trump administration seems hell-bent on doing at the moment.
Well, certainly this global financial system, whether it's domestically or internationally, it seems set up for the ordinary person, the bottom 99.9% that are not friends with the central bankers. Whether it's in the United States, where all the jobs happen in either New York City or San Francisco, but the barrier to entry is you need tens of thousands of dollars to move there and even get on the rental ladder. And rents keep on rising rapidly. This is part of the central bank printing money over and over. But where cash is needed most, where credit and money is needed most, the bankers don't want to lend to them, because those are higher risk when there's easy money just speculating in New York City real estate, for example. So who's going to give money to somewhere in Kansas? Nobody cares about Kansas. Nobody cares about the middle of nowhere Argentina.
Well, I think it was Warren Buffett who said that banks will famously lend you money to buy umbrellas when it's sunny outside, but once it's raining, you'll never be able to borrow to buy an umbrella. I paraphrase, but something along those lines.
Yeah, well, it's always sunny economically in New York or Manhattan in this sort of Ponzi-based system. So I want to look at in Europe, where we have another similar financial currency-based crisis, possibly on the horizon. And this is something that you and I have also talked about here on the Keiser report since 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis, is what's going to happen to Italy. Now, my own experience of dealing with Italy when they were still on the lira, and I was working at a film sales company, so we had a lot of distribution, Hollywood films sold to Italy, is they kept on devaluing the lira, and then they would come to us and say, we need to renegotiate this deal because the lira has been devalued by 20% overnight. So we always had to renegotiate because they had no money, right? So how have they been able to sustain economically in the Eurozone when it's all basically the Deutsche Mark they're competing against? Well, they haven't. And, they're forming a government. They're trying to form a government. They were supposed to have formed a government by the time we've come on the show, but they haven't. So, the Five-Star Movement, that's kind of the left-wing movement. Beppe Grillo used to be the head of it. Now it's Luigi Di Maio. And then the Northern League, which is the far-right movement, very anti-immigrant and very far-right Northern League, they're trying to form a coalition government. But one of the things on the table is actually a parallel currency for Italy. And the thing that's remarkable about this is that there's actually a lot of print media about this leading up to the election. So from the last year, like all the major parties of Italy, bar one, which is the Five-Star Movement, wanted an alternative currency, a parallel currency to the euro in order to bring liquidity and credit into the Italian market because nobody wants to lend to them.
We've seen this movie before. It's called Greece.
Yes.
They went through the exact same thing for the exact same reason, that they had an inflationary boost once the euro was introduced, and then they got into trouble because they were borrowing money at the same rates as Germany, and they indebted themselves into crisis. And now that's moved over to Italy. Now, of course, Italy wants to do a parallel currency, just as Greece wanted to do a parallel currency. Steve Keen was on our show talking about that extensively. They could have backed it by silver. It could have been the new drachma. Who got involved? The IMF, the ECB, and the EC, the Troika, stopped that from happening because they're in the business of killing countries for the benefit of hedge funds like John Paulson. Italy, as we speculated back 5 or 6 years ago, would be the next feast on the never-ending movable feast of IMF, EC, ECB, kill and destroy, Royal Bank of Scotland-esque, maim, torture, steal, pilfer.
They might be bringing in a parallel currency. It's probably not going to happen with this administration if they are able to form a government. But the fact that all the parties there want it, and the population wants it, it does suggest that there's either the end of the euro will ultimately end the euro, or it could inspire other countries to start doing it across the euro, the ones that aren't receiving any of the credit flow.
But the IMF doesn't want it, so it won't happen. Well, we got to go to a break. Much more coming your way, so don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to our homie, Marshall Long. He's an OG Bitcoin miner who's now branching out into other crypto avenues, including EOS.Fish. We're going to learn about that in just a few moments. Marshall, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks so much, Max. Good to be here. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. We have been, part of this crypto community for a number of years now, and we've seen all kinds of ups and downs and crazy kind of trends, and we're at a moment now in history where the Jurassic Park old guys like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett are weighing in with their comments. And according to them, you, as a cryptocurrency trader and miner, are a demented who harvests baby brains. How do you respond to these charges?
Well, dinosaurs have to die sometime. So I guess now's the time as good as any.
5 or 6 years ago, the trolls that would come and try to accuse the crypto community of being involved in something that was awful. Of course, they were low-level people living in their basement.
Exactly.
It's very, and I've got billionaires coming out after us. Jamie Dimon. I think that's got to be a good sign.
I think that's the only sign we're looking for at this point. When the old gray-haired dudes start trying to come for your money, that's how you know you're doing something right.
You're in mining. And you're still mining.
Of course.
Okay, and Morgan Stanley recently claimed that Bitcoin miners lose money on Bitcoin under $8,000 per coin. Now, we talked about this in Cancun at the Satoshi Roundtable, and, of course, you're one of the established miners out there, and so let's pick your brain a little bit here. What do you say to that statement?
I feel like those people are incredibly undereducated and use a very Western sense of what costs are. In general, we don't find any place that has over 4 cents per kilowatt hour for power cost. Power cost is a big driving factor in what they would call the price of production, and their projections are very over-exaggerated. However, that's just because they don't know what you can get power for when you sign deals with other government bodies.
So this $8,000 per coin is highly inflated, but there is at some point a price per coin that does affect mining, correct? Sure. with your actual energy costs. And as you point out, you're always looking to do deals with various governments. And a lot of governments have excess energy capacity. Right. They're looking to unload. So for them, it's a win-win, right? They would not use this energy anyway. Right. And so you're out there scouring the globe for energy. So in that way, it's energy efficient.
Sure. If there's a surplus, why not use it to secure a blockchain?
I mean, this idea that Bitcoin is energy inefficient,
right.
There's one reason why it's not. Mm-hmm. Another reason would be that, well, compared to what? Not compared to the dollar, right? I mean, all the energy in the dollar, the Pentagon, for example.
Yeah.
Or how about gold?
Yeah. If there's a surplus, why not use it for mathematically provable security instead of some bull stuff that they're doing around some U.S.-funded, basically terroristic activities?
Right. The U.S. dollar takes a lot of energy to make U.S. dollars, as backed up by the military. And the phrase you keep kicking in there, mathematically proven, mathematically sound, mathematically immutable.
Right.
It's an immutable, tradable value over the internet. Let's talk about this continued response to this whole idea of mining being an ecological disaster. I'm thinking about Iceland. They use geothermal energy, mm-hmm. So that's just coming right out of the ground.
That's literally a pump up. That's where it's coming from. It's all from the volcanic activity underneath, steam powered. There's a lot of the stuff in Iceland. Also, big countries like Sweden, they're closed off from the rest of the EU as far as their grid's concerned. Not a lot of people live in Sweden, but there's a lot of power in Sweden. So, some of the top 5 miners are in Sweden now. Also, there's a lot of stuff in like Cambodia and all these other kind of places that aren't densely populated. There's just extra power that they can't do anything with. And now with solar coming out, there's a whole other new demand dimension that, power used to be consumed a lot during the day because of the heat. Now solar panels are more efficient during the middle of the day, so the power curve has changed.
Solar electric power, the cost is dropping down that asymptotic curve like a microchip. Mm-hmm. So it's just becoming extraordinarily cost efficient to use solar to do the mining. On the technology side, on the chips, et cetera, the Chinese company you hear about, Jihan Wu, Bitmain, mm-hmm. Give us a little potted history of that whole storyline that's been going on.
Sure. So, that most of the ASICs come out of China. There are a few exceptions. However, these are the people, Jihan specifically, he got into crypto very early, around the same time I did, and he had a really big appetite for risk. He took some big risks to help make one of the first mining chips, and that's where they cut their teeth. And now you've got big companies like Intel, Samsung, all these companies coming out with prototype chips, and they're not as good as Jihan's stuff, in fact. Just because he's been in the game doing specifically crypto-related chips for so long, nobody can touch him at this point.
Right, and people suggest that there's a potential to monopolize the mining with those guys, but is that a fair statement, or?
Not really. At the end of the day, the brains behind the operation are employees, and employees move from company to company, and you see a decentralization of employees over the technology. So there's always room for improvement, and when the brains kind of get dispersed to different companies, you see a decentralization effect there.
Right now, if people argue that Bitcoin's backed by nothing, and yet, mining is energy intensive, right? So there's a direct connection there.
There's a 100% correlation between how secure your blockchain is and how much power you burn for proof of work coins.
Right.
It's backed by what? It's backed by the security that you use. You're burning power to secure your chain, and that's what it's backed by.
It's backed by energy.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And so for why this is elusive to folks, I'm not exactly sure. But let's move on to your next chapter in crypto life. So you've got EOS.fish. And you're a Bitcoin maximalist yourself, but, this EOS.fish is now on the radar. And to full disclosure, I think it was minded over some Cancun exotic drinks, perhaps, or maybe it was Puerto Rico. I can't remember exactly when or how. But now Max and Stacy are in EOS.fish.
Indeed.
So what have you gotten us into, Marshall?
A few flavored drinks with a few umbrellas later, and you guys are now in EOS.fish. So we feel like Bitcoin is cool and all that, but that was just chapter 1 in the crypto story. Ethereum kind of pushed the envelope a little bit further. And we think that EOS is going to be the next kind of big push as far as the next tech revolution as far as blockchain is concerned. So what we've roped you into there is basically layman's terms Ethereum 2.0, but better, I would say. Okay, so competes with Ethereum in, let's call it, the smart contract space. Sure. It's smart contracts 2.0 is what we'll call it. You've heard blockchain 2.0. Now we're getting to smart contract 2.0.
You know, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. You know, I came to that after a few years, realizing that you got to really, everyone is ultimately a Bitcoin maximalist because this is the never going to be another one like Bitcoin, and it's got the pedigree and the thrust in the market to do what it has to do. But so EOS it can live side by side.
Sure, and they serve different purposes. You know, EOS you can think of as kind of the operating system, and you can think of Bitcoin as more of the hardware behind it, because Bitcoin is a great project and it's very widely adopted, and Ethereum even is having troubles getting to that point. And EOS is more about the software layer and the 2.0, what we used to call the Web 2.0. Things like Uber and Lyft and these kind of companies are now the 3.0 version. This is kind of what EOS can enable to go to the next level.
So on the scaling side of things, you know, on Ethereum, they did a project called CryptoKitties.
Sure.
Which seemed like it clogged it up pretty quickly. So EOS, would this be a little bit more robust?
It can handle a lot more volume, a lot more transactions, and the way that it handles that is a lot different. It's more about it's more of a community-driven force. So with Ethereum, you can mine it, and that's where all these bottlenecks come into place. EOS has a concept called block producers, which is where EOS.fish comes in. But it's more community-focused, because if you mess up, then the community can vote you out of you being able to be a block producer. So that's a big part of what makes EOS great, is that the community decides who gets to kind of do what they want, and they vote with their tokens at that point. So it's put your money where your mouth is, not sit on the sidelines and talk.
Is it like a Dash masternode?
It's similar, except there's more power to the stakeholders in EOS.
Okay, and it's already like the number 5 coin on the market cap.
That's right, and their mainnet hasn't even launched yet, so.
Right, and Dan Larimer is kind of the guy, and
right.
He was also with BitShares and Steemit, which are got to be
great project,
successful. Steemit is you know, paying people now to post content to to the web. Now, when you see a story that Facebook is thinking about coming out with a crypto coin, what is that? Tell us what goes through your mind.
It's interesting, because you're starting to see a polarization effect. You'll see. You've got the big old gray-haired guys from Wall Street saying they hate crypto, and then you have big companies who basically run those old guys saying, no, we're going to also use it. So now you're seeing the split again, which is quite interesting. As far as big companies getting into blockchain, it was inevitable. It has a lot of efficiency advantages. As far as how they're going to use it, I think is wait to be seen, and the adoption rate, we'll see how she goes, I guess.
Right. Oscar Mayer, of course, with BitCoin. Their bacon-backed coin. Now, this is obviously
the most delicious of currencies, of course.
I mean, this is obviously is the company using blockchain as a promotion. We saw this with Burger King as well.
Sure.
Does this take away from the space, or is meaningless? The reason I mention it is because someone like a Peter Schiff will say, there's 1,800 cryptocurrencies, and even, you know, Oscar Mayer's got a cryptocurrency, Burger King's got a crypto. It seems to feed his perception.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about why that's probably wrong.
So, in general, the great projects will stand out, and the silly projects will just fall by the wayside. And the silly projects are what feed the trolls to be able to have more fuel to come back at us. So I think in general, the projects that are worthwhile will continue to outshine the rest of them, and the ones that aren't worth anything will just fall by the wayside eventually.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video of Peter Schiff with a combi, which is a gold card that you can break off into individual grams.
A Valcambi bar.
Right. And he was saying you could use that at the store to pay for stuff. Now, that obviously doesn't scale very well. when you could just use a cryptocurrency on your phone and do the whole thing.
Exactly.
It's just like gold.
Mm-hmm. Except I don't have to carry around 40 pounds if I want to buy a car or something, right?
All right, fantastic. So, being the fashion-forward thinking, hero of the space that you are, I see you're wearing the Bitcoin socks.
Of course.
Please give the audience a view of the Bitcoin socks.
So what we have here are the exclusive limited edition Bitcoin socks. Very rare indeed. What you can see is many different Bitcoins on the socks going right into the shoe. These are indeed very limited and only acquired by the true OG Bitcoiners.
Really?
Indeed, indeed.
My God, private keys are sewn into the fabric.
We're not allowed to talk about that at this point.
It's the Lambo of socks.
That's right.
All right, very good. Well, Marshall, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks so much, Max.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, Stacey Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Marshall Long.